Good evening. My name is Charles Simon. I'm the Executive Director of the Federation of Jewish Men's Clubs, the male volunteer arm of the Conservative Judaism. Incidentally, I'm a graduate of the Jewish Theological Seminary and was ordained many, many years ago. About 13 years ago, working with the Federation of Jewish Men's Clubs, we began to analyze and think about demographic change. What does that mean? It means what's happening to our families, who they're marrying, who they're not marrying, what's happening to them in their lives, and how it affects synagogue and conservative Masorti Jewish life. The purpose of this video is to provide you with a framework to understand how to begin to implement change in a congregation. It begins with two things. The first thing is understanding that every culture of every congregation is different. And if you want to have impact and create change in a congregation, you need to spend some time thinking about what's going to work in that community. One size can never fit all. And the second thing that one has to understand is the difference between custom in Jewish life and law in Jewish life. There's a great difference. Sometimes it's more difficult to change custom than it is to change law. What are some of the customs that we confront? Well, for example, what happens on the bima? Who stands on the bima is not a question of Jewish law. Trust me, Moses and the people who came after him didn't even have a bima, let alone we were concerned with who stood where. Bima choreography is about congregational custom. It's about what happened when the congregation was formed and how it's evolved since that period of time. What is written in the bulletin, whether or not an intermarried couple or the parents of a couple who was going to intermarry are accorded a mazel tov or not, is not a matter of Jewish law. It's a matter of congregational custom, and the same principles apply. As a matter of fact, when we think about what can be said in the synagogue bulletin, you have to realize that 20 years ago, rabbis in the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards of the conservative movement passed a ruling which advised us not to acknowledge intermarriages in a bulletin because they thought that would act as a deterrent for couples intermarrying. I've met many couples in my life, and not one of them chose not to marry because their name would not be mentioned in a synagogue bulletin. Who signs a marriage contract, however, is a matter of Jewish law, and that in order to be a witness for a marriage contract, one has to follow the dictates of Jewish law. Who counts in a minyan is another example of Jewish law. The law is that 10 men, and in most cases today, 10 people are required to constitute a quorum before we can have a minyan. Change is a cultural process. It doesn't have to be a painful one, but usually, if it's going to work, it needs to take time. The question is, who's going to interpret the law? Well, that's your rabbi. Sometimes it's cantors who have been trained to interpret the law. And the rabbi is called the Mara Da'atra, the teacher and interpreter of the law. He or she's legal decision is the interpreter of the law, and their decision should be considered to be the final decision in a matter of Jewish law. Rabbis are governed by the decisions of a Committee on Jewish Law of Standards of the Rabbinical Assembly. This committee writes and reviews papers written that interpret or respond to everyday situations that occur in our framework of our understanding Jewish law today. In most instances, everyone doesn't agree with every position in every paper. And when that occurs, the local rabbi has the authority to make the decision. The only time that a rabbi is bound to follow the dictates of the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards is if something called the rabbinic standard of practice is violated. In the past 50 years, only 3 rabbinic standards of practice have been instituted. The first one prohibits a rabbi from officiating at a wedding if a divorce has occurred without a bill of divorce being delivered. The second one prohibits a rabbi from officiating at civil ceremonies and performing marriages between someone who was born Jewish and someone who was not. And the third standard of rabbinic practice is concerned with the violation of placement services because the Rabbinical Assembly is a union. Rabbinical decisions, like any legal decisions, are not cut and dry. They reflect the interests and conflicts of the judge, or in this case, the rabbi. It's important for you to realize that often a rabbi wishes to institute change or is in sympathy with a family situation, but cannot satisfy their needs, either because he or she isn't in agreement or doesn't believe that the custom should change. Or, more often than not, because while the rabbi might grieve and wrestle with the desire to change congregational custom, he or she just isn't there yet. And when that occurs, we need to accept it and to understand it. Thank you.
Rabbi, what would you advise the new Keruv consultants and the trainees to take back to their synagogues after this training?
The first thing that I would do is I would go back and meet with my rabbi and my congregational president and share what I have learned. And then ask them what they think about what you've learned. And then see if it's possible to designate 2 or 3 areas where you could begin to create a plan in concert with your rabbi and other synagogue decision makers.
Rabbi, how would you evaluate our success in Keruv over the last 13 years?
I think we've changed the culture of conservative Judaism in the last 13 years and saved thousands of Jewish families from leaving the Jewish fold. I think we've been able to bring parents and children together so that they could more effectively wrestle with the issues of living together as a couple, as a part of a family, and figuring out how they could make Jewish life meaningful for their emerging family unit. I think this has been a remarkable change in such a short period of time. And if our movement is going to continue to build and to grow in the future, that we need more of this. We need to begin to bring people together to wrestle with tradition and with change in order to find and create future meaning.
Thank you, Rabbi.